Good afternoon. With a little bit of delay because the speaker got lost on campus, but was spotted and brought here, and then we also arranged for some audiovisual functionality. So I want to start to introduce Kiril Feferman, who is our current center fellow at the Center for Advanced Genocide Research at the Shoah Foundation. And my name is Wolf Gruner. I'm the director of the center and have the pleasure to welcome you all and to introduce the speaker. He is at the end of his residency at the Center for Advanced Genocide Research, and we hope that we can get a glance into what he accomplished during his stay here. He came to us in October, yeah. So almost 4 months are they flew by. And just to tell a little bit about his biography, he is mainly raised in Israel, but with a Russian background, if I can say this, and got his PhD at the Institute of Contemporary Jewry at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He was a postdoc fellow at Yad Vashem at the Holocaust Museum, and took on the senior lectureship at the Russian State University for Humanities in Moscow, and also headed the Educational and Research Department at the Russian Research and Educational Holocaust Center. And from there, last year, he made it back to Israel. So he's kind of switching between two worlds, and he published widely already. He published his main book, his dissertation, The Holocaust on the Russian Ethnic Frontier, the Crimea and the North Caucasus, just published in 2015. But he also published a textbook on the Soviet Jewry between Stalin and Hitler, and a book, The Soviet Jewish Stepchild, The Holocaust in the Soviet Mindset, which is more about memory and commemoration there in the Soviet Union after the Second World War. So there are several other articles, and I'm now don't want to waste more time to give him time to really give us insights in his current work on the role of religion in the occupied Soviet Union during the Holocaust. And just I wanted to thank, before he starts, this talk is co-sponsored by the USC Kasten Institute for the Study of the Jewish War in America, and the USC School of Religion. So thank you very much, and here's Kiril Feferman.
Does it work? No. Well, I hope all of you will be able to hear me anyway, even though this microphone doesn't work. Thank you very much, Professor Gruner, for your nice introduction. And indeed, time is actually running, and it is. Yes, and it is time to draw conclusions and to tell you what was accomplished. Well, I would say, before I begin, it was an incredibly interesting fellowship, one of probably the most interesting one I ever had. Thank you. Does it work? It's very close. Yes. Do you need to swipe a card here?
I don't think it's working.
It's working?
I don't think so. I don't know.
Okay. I hope one day we'll be able to solve all technological problems. In the meantime, you will have to rely on what we have. And indeed, this is a great archive. I think that probably people who work here on a daily basis do not really know on what treasure they sit every day. And I try to carve out a topic which is seemed to me very within the purview of my scholarly interest, but it is, it was not an easy topic to work on here, because you will see. You will see. I would say in retrospect, it was easier said than done, and but still, with this in mind, I'm especially happy with what was achieved. Now let's begin. Let me say a couple of words on the general topic of survival and rescue in the Soviet territories. It is one of the less researched subjects, and there are, to the best of my knowledge, only one or probably two scholarly articles, later, no books, which were written on this topic, and it is known. It's quite understandable because it's extremely difficult to study it. One of the reasons why it is difficult to study is the survival rate was very low. As far as I know, the average figure for all these huge territories was 0.2%. And as you can imagine, this 0.2%, not each of them was later able to offer testimony, especially if, some 40 or 50 years passed since then. In addition, the Soviet government, which was in charge and took upon itself to record to record Nazi crimes, and generally the general history of Nazi occupation, revealed very little interest, if at all, in recording and commemorating these cases, for a variety of reasons. I think it worked on the assumption that the Soviet people who did help Jews simply, or by the way, not only Jews, Bolsheviks and Soviet partisans and commercials, simply did their duty, so there is nothing to commemorate. This behavior on the part of the very strong Soviet government, Soviet administration, certainly made its impact on the individual Jews who were not, revealed their, very little interest in recording their own memories on this topic. And to this we can add decades-long Iron Curtain that fell down only in 1991, and which meant actually that people who remained in this under Soviet rule could not say anything, could not offer testimonies, could not record them and deposit them in archives, and only those relatively few fortunate people who were able to make their way to the West and were eager to record what occurred to them. Only they, for during 40 or 50 years, that's all we had on this topic. And of course, the time, was an essential factor. Over time, we have fewer survivors and fewer rescuers who could testify about what took place there. What took place since 1991 is that we have actually the generation of the last witnesses on both sides, Jewish and non-Jewish, and in this respect, the Shoah Foundation, which appeared, on the, let's say, emerged something like 25 years ago, was able to do, generally speaking, but especially with regards to this, regarding these territories, to do it at the very last moment. So, if, for example, it emerged now, there would be actually nothing to record. To the best of my knowledge, and in contrast to many other areas in Europe, we would be left with actually no picture about what transpired then. So the role of the Shoah Foundation is very essential in preserving the memory of what took place then, especially in respect to the Holocaust, to survival and rescue. So what you have here in your archive is only one side of the general picture. We should clearly understand it, because people who survived quite naturally put an emphasis on the stories of their survival, and therefore we have an emphasis on good side, on good stories, good people. And we should be cognizant of the fact that they represented and constituted only a tiny fraction of what took place then, and only 0.2 survived. And out of 0.2 we have these good stories. Not all of them talking about only about good things, but the emphasis certainly on good things, and that's why the emphasis in my talk will be also on the good side. Relatively good side. And so we should understand, that we should realize that the picture, picture remains inadequate. We will, with all what I say and other people wrote and say, we should understand, that many other stories remain untold, and there is no way actually to correct it. We should simply make allowance for this fact. So. In my project, what I meant by a religion, it is it is a huge philosophical category, and I'm not sure whether there exists a definition acceptable for everyone. So when I try to gauge how religion can be defined, I defined it as distinct from mundane or pragmatic considerations. For example, when a person is a non-Jewish was approached by a Jewish and by a Jew who asked him to give him a shelter, and a Jew, and it didn't make from any pragmatical point of view, it didn't make sense to give him to render him any aid because it was too dangerous even for repayment. But if something, some voice from the heaven told him that you should do it, then, so to say, he's my client. He turns into the topic of my work, and there were such people, and they behaved differently from pragmatically motivated people. They were also, not everyone who was religious behaved behave in a weird way. There were people who were both religious and pragmatic. But I was particularly interested in this group, which were whose decisions were heavily influenced by religion, to the point that they actually made something which was not expected from them if they were moved only by pragmatism. So. Regarding the Jewish survival, I actually lumped together everything that was relevant to Jewish survival, and the Jewish story during the Holocaust at that time, from fasting to prayers to rendering aid to for religious reasons, to trying to convert Jews or something else. For example, the other stories when people gave aid but did not attempt to influence Jews to convert, sort of mutual interfaith respect. So this project includes both Judaism and non-Judaism, and non-Jewish religions professed by non-Jews, from including various Christian denominations in the areas which I studied. Of course, the Orthodox Christianity was the prevalent religion, but we also had Catholicism. We have several Christian sects, and we also have Islam. Let me say several words about the space in which all these events took place. So you have the founder of the Soviet state, Vladimir Lenin, and Joseph Stalin, who was in charge by the beginning of the Second World War, in the Soviet Union, Marxism was sort of a religion, and they didn't tolerate competitors, and let's say in striking contrast to Nazi Germany, where National Socialism was able to coexist peacefully or non-peacefully with other religions. Marxism did not tolerate any competitors, and of course it never defined itself as a religion, but in fact in this practice by pushing aside all other competitors forcefully, it did behave as if it were a religion. Now it made itself felt in a crackdown on all religions from the early 1920s, especially on all Christian denominations and Judaism. The crackdown on Islam began only at the end of 1920s, and everyone was affected by it. There were no exception to the rule, and of course both Jews and non-Jews, and there were many results of this policy that lasted for something like for 20 years, and one of the effects was the considerable decrease in religious observance. I'm not sure whether we can say something about the faith, because it is it's a metaphysical category. Who can say whether it was on decrease? But it makes, I would say, the religious observance was certainly on the decrease. And the number of, I would say, professional people whose profession was to take care of the religion, like rabbis, they disappeared from I would say from the public domain, and because they were either deported or arrested, and it wasn't a too popular profession at that time. So one of the byproducts of the Soviet policy was a sharp increase in mixed families, for example, in Jewish Christian families, and all over the Soviet Union. And the particularly interesting phenomenon for my study was the increase, as revealed in your archive, is the phenomenon of mixed families in which a child was raised to embrace two religions, Christian and Jewish, and when time came to the time of big decisions during the Second World War, and he unlike other Jews, they didn't have to convert. They knew they already knew the other religion, and they felt quite comfortable about it, and they were also recognized by their setting as Christians. They could be still denounced on account of their Jewish origin, but regarding the religion, they didn't have to make something extraordinary efforts. Well, wait a second. Here we have a map of the Soviet territorial acquisitions after the beginning of the Second World War. You see the country, which was already not too small, became even bigger, and it included the territories heavily populated by the Jews. For example, this area, eastern Poland, which turned into western Ukraine and western Belarus, as well as the territories the Soviets took from Romania, so we saw this map. Alongside the territory, the Soviets quickly revealed that they also acquired the population whose profile was very different from what they got used to, and was very traditional. Eastern Europe is, generally speaking, is more traditional, more conservative than Western Europe, and the Soviets got it, and everyone was more traditional, both Jews and non-Jews, and the Soviets had to do something about it, because in order to bring about, I would say, alignment, And but they had only 2 years, even less than 2 years, and that's why. And despite the fact that they were active in this field, and many both professional religious people, namely priests, rabbis, people who were known to go to churches or synagogues, they were all deported and disappeared. There were thousands of others who remained. So, the task was simply too big for the Soviets, and they didn't succeed in solving this problem and creating the same population they had in their old territories. So what they have here in the Western territories, I'm focusing now on these westernmost territories, is a unique group of people. I'm talking now specifically about those who are religious. And we're talking about Jews and non-Jews alike, because in terms of political and religious behavior, they were quite similar. Classical, I would say, the classical case of more traditional, more conservative people, and both Jews and non-Jews, traditionally minded, they detested the Soviet atheist state, and they had a lot in common by that time, and this was the factor that would later impact the behavior of religious non-Jews who would provide Jews with aid during the Nazi occupation. So this is and this, the Germans, Nazi Germany invades Soviet Union, and the map shows you the areas of their maximal penetration to the Soviet Union. You see the territory divided into military administration and several civilian Reichskommissariaten. It's more or less local administrations. And it's a huge territory, and it is again we are talking about 1942, the time of the biggest Nazi penetration to the Soviet Union. So, what took place in terms of religion under Nazi rule in these all occupied Soviet territories? It brought about the religious renaissance. Everything that was closed under the Soviets was reopened. Churches were opened, mosques were opened. Everyone, it was a huge event, and the Germans the Germans got warm reception and were enthusiastically received by anyone who was who felt disappointment with the Soviets, especially on the religious issue. And I hope I will be able to show you one of the scenes how they were received. This is how they, it is part of the Nazi Germany's so-called Wochenschau. It is weekly shows that shown in every cinema theater in Germany, and this is how they what was shown about the entry of the German troops in the city of Riga in Latvia. But
Zum dritten Mal seit 1917 eroberten deutsche Soldaten Riga, diese alte Hansestadt, die in ihrer 700-jährigen Geschichte immer wieder ihre enge Verbundenheit mit dem Deutschtum bewiesen hat.
Wow. I enjoy it, but wow. Who knows how to,
Oh, so you have it over there?
Yes. No internet.
No. Is it on the PowerPoint?
No, it's not on the PowerPoint.
No, it's not showing.
If it's too complicated, we can do so.
Maybe you explain.
I will explain. Well, but it is everyone who wants to see it can see it later. It's very impressive, and well, I think it wouldn't be fair if only I will see this short movie, and but wait a second. No. I think we can't get rid of this picture. Huh. You did it.
Okay. Are you going to skip the
Yes,
movie?
yes. Very good. I'm sorry for all these technical problems. So, alongside Germany, Nazi Germany, Germany was greatly aided by other powers, Axis powers that invaded the Soviet Union, and one of them was, which contributed most significantly to the Nazi Germany's military effort, was awarded with a significant slice of the Soviet territory, and. The map will show, at the next. It's so inconvenient. Wait a second. Wow. Okay. I hope I will be able to. It's not convenient, but we'll try to do most of it. So the occupation regime was generally by far milder under the Romanians than under the Germans for a variety of reasons. The most important reason was that, in contrast to Germany, Romania saw this newly acquired slice of the Soviet territory as a future part of the actual Romanian territory and not a colony, but actually part of Romania, and that's why it doesn't. We should not idealize their policies, but of course, the occupational regime was by far milder. In contrast to Nazi Germany, which didn't, which of course encouraged the religious Renaissance, but I would say was relatively indifferent to it because it never set itself a goal to Christianize our local population. For the Romanians, Romania was a sort of a, say, old occupation power, and it did want to baptize the local population, and that's what really took place. The hundreds of thousands of local people were baptized. And of course, the biggest deviation from the Nazi pattern of behavior with respect to the Holocaust was the fact that the Holocaust, meaning the physical annihilation of the Jews, ended in Romanian-controlled territory starting from early 1942. The Jews still led a very miserable life there. Thousands died of starvation from forced work, but not from mass shootings like as it was the case in German occupied territories. And that's why we have many more survivors from these territories, and that's why it of course it is felt in what we have in any archive, including the archive of your archive. There are many more people who survived in these territories, and that's why we have much more to say on what took place there, as in contrast to what to the German occupied territories. In the Romanian case, there was the Jewish existence was tolerated from early 1942, and Judaic religion was also likewise tolerated, and people could profess their religion. Some, at the same time, there was some drive to baptize them. Romania was the country that embraced to some extent Nazi terminology and ideology, and it was, on the one hand, quite skeptical about I would say, correcting Jews by means of their baptism. On the other hand, such cases did happen here and there, on a much wider scale than under the Germans, and sometimes it brought about the rescue Jews. Sometimes it did not. We will see it later in one of the testimonies. So as I say, sometimes it was recognized, sometimes it even led to the rescue of Jews. Here is, I found an interesting story about a guy then he was still I think he was something like 15 years old boy at that time under the Romanian rule, and it took place still at the time when the physical annihilation did take place. That is in 1941. The Jews there was a line of Jews, and there were Romanian soldiers ready to shoot at them, and suddenly, we don't know why, some change took place, and there appeared a Romanian officer who asked Jews, "Do you believe in God, or are you Bolsheviks?" And of course, all of them responded they believe in gods, and all of them were allowed to go. Something, this is a very small sin, but something that was entirely incredible anyway in the German-controlled territories, because for the Germans it simply didn't matter, whether the Jews believed in God or they were Bolsheviks, because all of them were duped. What counted was their race or religion, and that's all. So how did Jews react in terms of religion to what took place, to what occurred to them? Some of them prayed for salvation, others prayed to precipitate death of concrete evildoers. There was also a very interesting phenomenon of talking to God, asking him to bring about the rescue of family members, if there were still family members alive by that time. Simply talking to God without asking to achieve anything, and trying to just to understand what took place. And of course, Jewish religion was a factor which played a role when Jews considered their baptism. And of course, we have this offer of baptism much more widespread in the Romanian-controlled territories than under the German rule. Here is one testimony when a person tries to talk to God, asking him to bring about the rescue of the family members. All this took place in the Romanian-controlled territory during the so-called interim period, when Jews could be killed and could not be killed. There was still uncertainty. And here is the testimonies in Russian. I will translate, the most basic points. So we went from house to house, and it took place somewhere in the area very close to the German border, but still under Romanian rule, and actually under the control of local police and Germans and Romanians. We don't know exactly who was in charge there. So we went from one house to another. Then we were denounced, and my mother was taken from a camp, and a soldier and a policeman came, and there was also a imam. It was clear cut that we would be brought to execution tonight. Then I think, yes, I think it was then. I didn't know any prayer. I thought it was time to approach some supreme force and to ask. I didn't cry. I simply, in Russian, she began to pray the way, you know, as I could, as much as I could. And the German went away. He realized that the police, the policeman, the local policeman, would cope with such a task, such a simple task, with to take care of a woman with 2 children, and he didn't want to waste time. It was cold and it was night. My mother decided to gamble. She told him, that is to the local policeman, you have already killed people, and you already enjoyed it, and if you so what, you know, what will take place. I also translate and try to interpret what is not said but what was meant. So you know, so if you will shoot 1 or 3 times, you know what will take place, and you will forget it, and I'm ready to pay. And so he's offering, he's asking for a huge sum of money, and then they are ready, you know, with the help of the local non-Jews to collect this huge sum of money. And then this witness says that, you know, she realized that her prayer was heeded, were heard at that time. So there is another testimony dealing with more or less the same topic. You see, the person was already 17, 18 years old by that time, and the testimony was in English. So in this case, he didn't ask. You know, it was even probably close to talk without to God without any specific request. And we can probably, as far as I understood his testimony, it remained largely unanswered. So I think, you know, all of you know to read English, and I don't need to reinterpret it. So baptism, which was a very important watershed in the life of many Jews, and of course this factor was especially meaningful in the life of the so-called Western Jews, who were more traditional, by far more traditional than the Soviet Jews, who were by far more secular. And there is small wonder that, you know, Western Jews interviewed by your archive, I recall these stories of baptism much more often. So again, the story, you know, please note, again, takes place in the Romanian-controlled territory. Again, many more survivors. So he's depicting a period when there was a pause in executions, and they were told all Jews who remained alive are requested to get some square. There is a church there, and everyone has to embrace Ukrainian faith. That is Christianity. I assume it is Orthodox Christianity, and to baptize. And then they will remain alive. What was I supposed to do? I had to go. So we went, and there were some 300 people at the square. And there was also one rabbi. He clearly uses the word rabbi because the testimony was given in the United States, where the witness emigrated. So this is the word. So, and we stood near this church. And we went there and we stood in a line. I was standing and thinking, well, now it is my turn to approach and to embrace Christianity, or should I not embrace Christianity? somehow I learned Judaism. I know that you should not become an apostate. In front of me there was this rabbi. I told him, "You are a Jew. How come you can change your religion? You can betray your religion and embrace Christian faith?" And he said, "I'm doing it for the sake of life. I will come through all this, but inside I will remain a Jew." So he went, and then it was my turn. I thought, no, if I am destined to remain alive, I will remain the person that I was born. If I am destined to die, I will die as my father died, and by that time, all his family was already killed. I will die as my father died, as a Jew. So I went up and I went away and didn't baptize. I didn't embrace Christianity, and 2 weeks later, there was a roundup, and all those who were baptized were brought to execution and executed. So you see how it worked. They were under. I would say it is a terrible story, but I would say it is the what took place under Romanian rule is. The story is by far more multi-layered, and the German rule, you can't find such stories, and has fluctuations of policy from one extreme to another one. So there is another story of how Jews preserved Judaism despite it is against all odds, and their behavior being entirely not pragmatical. And in order to understand it, I should give you some theological introduction. There is one of probably the most important Jewish holiday, which is called Yom Kippur. And Jews are supposed to fast on this day, and it is the most important obligation, one of the most important commandments, and of course those who fast are promised the reward, and at least in the coming year. So the story took place somewhere in the forest when a group of Jews escaped from a ghetto, and we have a group of Jews. All of them were religious. Actually, they were teenagers, and they wandered around this forest. Of course, they were afraid to see anyone, probably with the exception of partisans, and so. And they all knew each other because all of them came from the same small shtetl. And all of them were traditional. So they found themselves. It was already fall 1942, and Belarus. It was very cold, and some of them, the head of this group, remembered remembered what day it was then, and remembered it was time of Yom Kippur, and they find potatoes, the most popular and widespread food in Belarus, and prepare and especially a big meal, if one can call it so. Baking, I would say 3 instead of 1 potatoes, which was a big meal by that time. And then they began to fast. And people who were half dying from starvation began to fast. It is a clear case of religiously motivated behavior, which contradicts, pragmatical considerations, because, then to add salt to injury, the fire that they took care of in order to warm themselves was extinguished. How do you say it? And because of it, it was raining, and on Yom Kippur it is impossible to do anything with the fire, and so the people simply, were fasting and suffering from cold, from starvation during the whole day. But they felt that that it was very important for them to preserve their identity, and in terms of, and of course, as religious Jews. And of course they had prayers at that time, which is something very exceptional and very meaningful. And not all of them were very religious by that time, but all of them, they felt that it was important despite everything. Here is another testimony of what I call interfaith dialogue that could evolve not too often, but sometimes. It took place again in this Romanian-controlled territory, but at this time, and some God-forsaken village where they found a shelter, and the religious family from Eastern Poland found a shelter. And the family was led by a grandfather, and who was particularly strict in terms of keeping the commandments of the Jewish religion. And now over time, all of them began to suffer from starvation, and it was especially the case with the child, the witness who was born in 1932. So he was 10 or 11 years old by that time. And once there was a holiday in this this Christian family that hosted them, and the hostess, who took note that the child was particularly suffering from starvation, offered him ham, and of course it is impossible. You can't eat ham. Observant Jews are forbidden to do it, and he said no way. And then the old Christian lady approached his father and had a conversation with him, trying to convince him that religion is of course a good thing, but your child is starving. The conversation was long, and eventually the grandfather is saying he permitted him to do it. And we're talking about the Haredi Jews, which is a big event, I would say. He says, "I'm taking your I'm taking your sin on myself, and let the child eat it, and which is, well, you can say." This was one of the most meaningful examples, of this, so to say, interfaith dialogue that I found here. So let me say several words about the local people. How the local people, for the purposes of the studies, I divided them into priests, that is, people who let's say, everything they did was motivated by religion, and lay people. Of course, it is a generalization, but it's for the purposes of the study I did it. And ordinary people, lay people, who who did what they did, and we can say that they were particularly motivated by religion only if they explicitly said it in their testimony. So if we feel it this way. Now, so we're talking about priests now. What was very widespread in this territories, in both Romanian and German territories, was baptism for money. It was much more widespread under Romanian rule, simply because baptism was much more widespread. It did make sense, generally speaking, for Jews to baptize and to pay money for baptism, because it didn't bring about the survival. But of course there was exceptions to the rule. Now there was another case when the priests refused to take money and baptize simply for the sake of baptism, and I would say their reasoning was that God will take care about your salvation, and sometimes, in several cases, we have a phenomenon when Jews continue perceiving themselves as Christians until today, or at least until the point when they were interviewed, influenced by the priests who converted them. And sometimes I would say it is more or less, it is 50-50. Jews immediately ceased behaving and perceiving themselves as Christians after the liberation. And the behavior of the priest, whether he did it for a church or to save their soul, was crucial in this respect. And sometimes priests, once he already a priest converted Jew, he simply couldn't. He had to take care of his or her conversion only, and by doing it, he actually took care of himself, because if revealed, the priest himself would be, the odds are very high that he would be, at least under the Germans, he would be revealed and tortured and shot. So what do we have about laymen? There was one case of when a Jew entirely, who already forgot about, or almost forgot about everything about his tradition, finds a shelter with a non-Jew somewhere in a farm, a very remote farm, and this writer's non-Jew is taking care of him, is providing him with food and clothes, everything one can dream about. And in addition, he took this writer's peasant took care to travel to a nearby ghetto, which was not yet liquidated, and to find to buy a prayer book. And it was I would say it's a relatively risky enterprise, because there was such persons were it was a suspicious behavior, and he's taking care to bring this prayer book and to give it to a Jew, and explicitly encouraging him to behave as Jews are supposed to behave, and that is to pray. Another widespread pattern of behavior among non-Jews was to try to bring about their conversion and to convince them to embrace Christianity. It was especially manifest among Baptists. They were not too numerous, but this was a very important group in terms of Jewish survival for a variety of reasons. First of all, these people, since they were not so numerous, they were generally targeted and persecuted even before, in previous decades and centuries, both by the Soviets and even under Russian rule, because they were not the most important Christian denomination in the area. So these groups remained very coherent. They were much more zealous, and they also felt, I think, more compassion for the persecuted. But their religious zeal did not abate at all by that time, so it was the classical Christian motive of conversion. We will have it in one of the testimonies, so we will see it soon. And so sometimes once the Jews were converted, they were and baptized, these groups to which they now belong try to protect them from the authorities as they grasp this newly and the Jews as ours. And sometimes there were even clashes between the local Christians and authorities who revealed Jews and wanted to bring them to execution, because it didn't make sense for it, especially for the Germans to they didn't recognize it, and but it was important for the local Christian communities. So this is the testimony I was talking about. She's talking. So this took place in Ukraine, Odessa district, again Ukrainian-controlled territory. These Baptists were very good people. They were very poor. They didn't make abortions. Had 9, 10 children. They had helped us a lot. The witness's family was given bread one day before the Yom Kippur, the day when Jews are supposed to eat, to have a specially good meal before the day of fasting. So these people took care they brought them, despite the fact that they were poor, they gave them bread, and they said, tomorrow you have a holiday, eat. They came to us and read Gospels. We had a girl whose name is Kotovskaya. She believed them. Her parents were killed. They took her to themselves. So she was beaten every time by gendarmerie because she was she now belonged to them. She was both a Jewish, from the point of view of the Romanian gendarmes, both a Jewish and the Baptist. And so I can keep on with my stories more and more, but I think this is time to stop and to draw some conclusions. It was the religion was of course a marginal phenomenon in the behavior of people in the occupied Soviet territories. Even most devout people became less observant because the material conditions were so harsh, and despite the fact that they had more opportunities to profess their religions. I'm talking, of course, about non-Jews. At the same time, a small minority, motivated specifically by religious reasons, went out of their way to help Jews and protect them. The classical Christian motives, I would say, resurfaced here in these territories after decades of oblivion and or ban on religion, or several years of ban. And in my estimate, which are based not only on what I found in this archive, but also on the archive of the writers among the nations in Israel, which is especially a big category of people who are recognized by Yad Vashem as writers among the nations. That is, people who saved, rescued Jews without any remuneration. In my estimate, something like 10% of all rescues in these territories were motivated specifically by religions, which is a huge figure for this, I would say, territory which was supposed to be entirely non-affected by religion. And we know this, I hope it will give us more food for thought about the impact of a religion and its interaction with human behavior in such extreme conditions, in future researches. Thank you very much.
So now the floor is open for questions or comments.
I had one. Were the Romanians mostly Catholic or were they Protestant or Catholic?
None.
What?
None. They were Orthodox Christians.
They were Orthodox
Yes.
Christians.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in the beginning you talked about religion just juxtaposed to pragmatism. So why would you choose then the term religion for it? You could also say spirituality. For example.
Yes, well, it is, of course, by the way, in this archive, it took me, I think, 3 weeks to cover all the terms which may be somehow close to what I was looking. Something from metaphysical experience to but I had to find one term, I think it is of course it is debatable that this is the term that describes it in the best possible way, but it's of course it's debatable. Metaphysical. It was clearly different from another basic motive that motivated rescues in these territories. I would call it humanitarian motives, or there was a huge number of people whom I about whom I didn't talk here because it's not the topic of my presentation. The leftists, the communists and the Bolsheviks, who said people because they were our people, our citizens. But this is a different group, and in the communist country, it was only natural to expect, that many people influenced by this religion. But this is the group that you don't expect here, and still 10%. It is a This is my estimate is a huge number, and I mean it is meaningful, and to give them their recognition even even a bit too late.
Sure, thank you so much. You stimulated me with regard to the Cambodian genocide. So I just want to make a parallel comment on Cambodian genocide survivors and conversion to Christianity, and then ask you a question about patterns that you found in testimonials. So, I mean, the Khmer Rouge derailed monks, but they basically converted people to nothingism, not even really communism. But it was after Cambodians went into refugee camps that Christian-based NGOs, a lot of them being Baptist from the United States, came in and converted masses of Cambodian survivors. The patterns that I've been following in the testimonials in the Cambodian literature is those survivors outside Cambodia, because I have a whole cohort of people from inside Cambodia that weren't converted. Those who were children at the time of the conversion and then took passage to places like the United States or Australia, in their testimonials, their identity as Christian and the way they give meaning to what happened to them is they don't give any power over to the Buddha, they give power over to God. And so, and then those who were older, who were converted, they said just what some of yours in your tape said, I'll be Buddhist on the inside and appear Christian on the outside till I get to that country and get that passage. They became Buddhists, so they're living in homes with, Buddhist rituals, but the children are going to church or maybe getting into Christian schools. So I'm just wondering if you've seen a pattern in those testimonials you've reviewed of those who may have been, if they survived, children at the time of that conversion, and how they make meaning of what happened to them, and if their identity has stayed Christian. So I'm really curious about that cohorted age group in testimonial meaning making.
I would say the huge majority of the survivors are women, and in this specific case, in this specific space, it was so, and it is so. Women are generally more religious. They were more religious, and they are more religious. So if you, for example, compare responses by men versus women, men, even they embrace Christianity for a while. They stopped doing it after the liberation. Quite a significant number of women, who were girls by that time, converted and kept their Christian beliefs after the events. Somehow you see this strange mixture of Judaism they had heard about when they were children, and these newly acquired Christian beliefs. And actually, it is, when people are were interviewed 10 or 20 years ago, what counted more was who influenced them more, their rescuers, Christian rescuers, or their parents whom they probably even don't remember, but it's all revolving about their memories, it is quite a recurrent motive that I had to do it. For example, I have to preserve my Jewish identity, even though sometimes it includes Christian religion, by the way, because I owe these people. Mm-hmm.
Did you mention that many of the rescuers were motivated by religion?
Yes.
So what you said, yeah?
Yes.
So there is a parallel of certain rescuers, not only from the area, but motivated to save many Jews in different areas as well. So I see a parallel to a certain degree of the motivation of religion and how we motivated them, and how, like, one of them, Sousa Mendes, that we was thinking of, the one was in Bordeaux with the Portuguese consul. Was also totally motivated by religion. He says so. What's interesting is that they're in different areas, and therefore how it affected them, how they could show it, is totally different. That's what's so interesting.
Oh yes. Absolutely. When I'm wondering how how all these events affected other areas, at least in the Soviet Union, there was a huge, among the Jews, those few who survived, there was a huge decrease in religious belief and religious observance. From the little that was left after the decades of the Soviet persecutions, those who had kept something, they were so much disappointed with what they had witnessed that there was a departure from Judaism, not only from, but sometimes also the departure from Jewish people, because they felt abandoned, I think it also took place in other regions, to the best of my knowledge. But here, you see, the foundation was already so shaky that it was. This is one of the byproducts of what took place then. And in contrast, I must say that among the non-Jews, German occupation. It's not good to say so, but it was certainly, from the religious point of view, it was a blessing, because it brought about religious renaissance they didn't dream about. So Jews and non-Jews, Jewish and non-Jewish communities began to develop in opposite directions since then.
So you said for the rescue, religion played a bigger role than you expected.
Yes.
But if you think about survival, what would you say, since you have very conflicting testimonies, what role would play religion for survival of the Jews? Because you brought this one contemporary that they actually fasted, although it was not actually
yes.
practically a good recommendation. So
Well, in practical terms, my estimate that it's of course it's I'm not talking only about these territories, but it's a much wider observation that it helped people survive when they had a supportive community. And or if at least you needed someone to be, if you were left alone with and you had to make, big decisions, it was rather a hindrance because religion imposes so many limitations. So now behavior, you shouldn't go there, you shouldn't eat, you shouldn't talk to these people, and of course the circle of your friends is framed by your religion. The more religious you are, the more framed, the more the more I would say, the more close is this circle, and you actually don't know anyone who could help you outside of this circle. So I mean, once this supportive community disappears, and it disappeared, people had a problem, to put it mildly. And now, so from what was an asset turned into a liability. And also, it's not so much, it doesn't have, it's not related to rescue, but I would say from what is hinted here and there in these archives, in these testimonies, and also in other archives, I would say it was easier to die if people were religious, in contrast to those who were not religious, because it gave them more strength at the crucial moment. But to survive alone, it was a big problem, a very big problem. So if they were lucky to land in one place and to spend there, we have such cases, especially in the Romanian control zone, without moving anywhere throughout the whole period of occupation, they were fortunate, and they could even preserve their religion. If they had to wander around in pursuit of food, generally it is about food, and the religious observance didn't really help them, to put it mildly.
I wonder whether you could talk about some of the methodological challenges
Oh.
in your analysis, because it strikes me that saying that priests are always motivated by religious,
Of course, yes.
for religious reasons might be a problematic.
Absolutely.
assumption.
Well, they're ordinary people, like all of us. But it's. I think it's probably it's I would say people who were trained as who studied a lot, who lived in this world. I assume that most a bigger part of their behavior is motivated by religion. But probably it is an oversimplification. I don't know. But I had to make some. I felt I had make some differentiation between them and a layman. But in terms of mythology, it was an enormous challenge, and because actually every approach, every definition may be challenged, and even what I call what I define as a religiously motivated behavior. I can easily imagine people who would say that it is only partly motivated by religion, and it was so to break it down by what they thought, by what they felt, it was very difficult, and I still think that there is a lot of work that has to be done here, but what matters here, nevertheless, is that it was different. I mean, what their considerations were different, and they were not, they were different from what ordinary, what I would call a conventional normative behavior. But it's a very complex topic, absolutely, because here we're talking about what people thought, what people felt, and it's very difficult. It was not easy. It wasn't. It is not easy. Thank you, Martha.
I just want to, it's a really fascinating source space for studying this. Also poses, as you said, a lot of challenges because it's a fraction of reality. And there's just so many variables, right? Because, for instance, even when you get into occupation zones and you think, okay, this is the German zone, that's the Romanian zone, the German occupation troops themselves were varied, so there's quite a bit of evidence, for instance, where Hungarians were part of the occupation forces or Slovakians, and so the Axis forces themselves came from different religious traditions, and Germans themselves individually, especially those engaged in rescue, also acted on religious motivations. And then you have religious anti-Semitism, so you have perpetration of violence in the name of the Christ killers. So, and then on a bigger level, more philosophical, spiritual level, you have the reality of a moment of crisis and people facing immortality, and there's this phenomenon in which people who might not otherwise be religious suddenly find God because they're looking for a higher power to help them make sense of the death of a family member or their own mortality. So this is, I mean, there's just so many facets to this, and I just wonder if not only you started out with a context in which you told us a story of the Sovietization of these areas and the incursion of Marxism as a new religion, and really that's, in the scheme of things, that's a brief period of time, and it impacted part of a generation. But there's a broader context of a secularization of Europe that's occurring in different places to different degrees, from west to east, and it's coming together in the eastern occupied zones because of the movement of the German troops and the Hungarians, and even Slovakian. There were Spanish expeditionary forces in the occupation. So.
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
It's an incredibly complicated, multi-layered
Yes, absolutely
story,
right.
and it's a generational story, right?
Yes, yes.
Because people who were socialized with religious rituals versus those who were born, in the 1920s, and all these factors then set against your source space, which is very specific too. I don't have any answers, and I'm sorry, I'm rambling. I don't really have any questions. I'm just empathizing with you. I don't know. It's a project. It's very ambitious.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And at some point, I think maybe if this were a monograph, that all these issues would have to be laid out and indicated that you're not going to find all the answers, and this is the evidence you have, but these are all the possibilities, because
Absolutely.
it's hard to draw.
Yes. It's a big challenge. I agree with you. And again, I should say, this specific archive and this project is based on good stories. All other stories, for example, when priests led the villages to conduct riots against Jews, or greeted Nazi troops with bread and salt, and yes, and crosses. And again, I should say the German occupation brought religious renaissance. It's the unique place probably anywhere else, anywhere that that the Germans could be credited with. No one would acknowledge it openly, in the post-Soviet states. But indeed, this is a fact. And to find in this environment religiously motivated rescues of Jews was particularly difficult because of this background. Because the Germans were welcomed, the Soviets were detested, Jews were as always identified with the Soviets, but still religious Jews were much less identified with the Soviets because they suffered. Everyone knew that they suffered like religious non-Jews. So they were Jews, but they were, so to say, they were, one could hardly say that they benefited somehow from the Soviet rule. And this sense, it gave them some additional points in the eyes of a traditionally minded non-Jewish population. And of course, they were, everyone tried to bring God on their side. All these insignia like "Got me tunes," it was. And all this, all these layers, it is incredibly difficult. But I think, it can be confined even in a monograph or in an article, and because I'm not going to rewrite the story of the Holocaust in this area from the religious point of view. It is, it's beyond me. But simply to bring an additional layer, and to tell which is entirely overlooked. Even as I said, the question of rescue is not handled, and it is part of the rescue. Only 10%, even if it is 5%, but it was not handled. So it should be simply given its due. Yes.
Okay, I think we can thank Kiril.
Thank you very much.